Good evening. So we've been in India about 30 hours only. I was mentioning on the bus, it feels a bit longer, doesn't it? You get about a week's worth of sense impressions in a day, and then it affects perception. Like, oh, it's only been a day. So today the morning plan went perfectly. And we can only come up with kind of a working strategy, understanding a little about the rhythms of these places, having been many times. So we were able to meditate together, do our puja, meditate for an hour and a quarter at the place where Lady Sujata offered milk rice to the Bodhisatta on the eve of his enlightenment. And then we also chanted the fire sermon, not far from where that sermon was taught to the 1,000 fire-worshipping ascetics on the banks of the Naranjara River in Gaya. So it's very wonderful to have the opportunity to come to these places, because when you go back to your homes and you chant that in Pali, and you'll remember, yeah, the banks of the river of Gaya, the fire sermon, I've been there. And when we come to a place like Bihar, many of you coming from very developed and comfortable situations, we come to a place like Bihar during the peak of the pilgrimage season, when we have to work with the traffic, the dust, the noise, the sheer numbers of people. It requires faith, and it requires patient endurance, and it's a very, very valuable activity, even the uncomfortable part of it, because it's demonstrating your faith. One of the things we were considering as well was the teaching Lord Buddha, the contemplation Lord Buddha made under the goat-herd banyan tree. In one of the weeks after his enlightenment, he experienced the bliss of liberation for a week, and he was in awe of the Nibbana that had been realized, and he was like, how is this even possible? Because it's so different to what beings in the world experience. It's completely against the stream, and he made the statement that beings in the world relish self, and completely caught up and mired in concepts about self and other. And what he'd realized had nothing to do with self. It completely abandoned the self-view, attachment to it, and he recognized that it was difficult to penetrate, kind of obtuse. And he saw that it was the 5 spiritual powers, when cultivated, made much of, lead to the deathless and merge in the deathless. So the faith is the first one. So when people come and demonstrate their faith, come on pilgrimage, all of the sacrifices that need to be made, the saving up of the money, getting the time off work, and the money could be spent other ways, nice holiday somewhere else. But we demonstrate our faith, and this is important because, as Lord Buddha explained, realizing the deathless, it's not easy. And crossing to the other shore, I mean, he could see that beings were crossing up and down one end of the shore, literally from the hell realms to the heaven realms. And but to cross to the other shore of Nibbana, relatively speaking, very few beings manage that. But when we do this kind of activity, save the money, book the ticket, get the time off work, come to another country, go against the grain of that which is comfortable. This is demonstrating outwardly the kind of qualities. You know, we do things externally, and it develops qualities inwardly. Because to have insight, to glimpse the deathless, Nibbana, the unconditioned, it's a leap of faith. You have to have confidence that it's actually there. You have to have confidence that it's better, because the 5 hindrances, the kilesas, the self-view, we're so accustomed to it, we're so familiar with it, and we're very attached to it. And there's fear. I sometimes people talk with me about their experiences when they're trying to cultivate meditation in the beginning stages, the things like the breath stopping, appearing to stop, and then a person gets scared and forces themselves to breathe or opens their eyes because, heaven forbid, the self would disappear. It's like, on one level, we want to be free of the burden of thinking we're a self, but it goes away for a moment and people quickly grasp at it again because it's the fear of death. What happens in meditation when the breath appears to stop, when practicing anapanasati, is that the mind is taking peacefulness as the object and turning away from the five senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and coming into the mind sense space. Actually the breath is still there, very fine, but the mind isn't interested in it, it's not paying attention to it, it's coming inwards, and that's very important, that we learn to let go of those more coarse senses and learn how to trust the goodness of a peaceful mind. And then on the level of insight, we have to be willing to, we have to want to go beyond self. We have to be willing to let go of that we're familiar with, comfortable with, even though it's a lot of suffering. So exactly what you're doing, and I commend you. I commend you for being willing to do it, and I believe that it's genuinely very helpful, doing these outer activities and cultivating the qualities and producing the merits that will help make those inner leaps of faith to experience the glimpse, not self, have temporary liberations. What's interesting about this group and this pilgrimage is that the time that you're in Bodhgaya synchronizes perfectly with the Nyingma Modalam Chenmo. You didn't know what that was until yesterday, did you? It's the biggest of the Tibetan Nikkaya prayer festivals. So in the Tibetan you have the Nyingma, the Kagyu, the Gelugpa, the Shakya. And so in Bodhgaya, the Nyingma one is the biggest one. And I believe it started yesterday when we arrived, and I believe it finishes the day we come back. And so and also His Holiness the Dalai Lama is apparently still in residence in Bodhgaya. So I would deduce that this is actually a result of merit, and I would deduce that it's karmic affinities that you have with the Mahayana tradition. Many of you, may I just ask, how many of you have faith in Bodhisattas? Guanyin, Manjushri? You have some faith, appreciation? Okay, it's your fault. So when these people are praying to the Buddhas and the other Bodhisattas, Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, etc., Guru Rinpoche, all of the pujas that they're doing and the prayers that they're doing all day, there really will be, these, when thousands of beings invoke blessings, they do come, especially in this place. The challenge is, so do thousands and thousands of people who have the karmic connections with those beings, and so here we are, and that's our particular challenge. It was interesting today, the morning went perfectly as planned, the afternoon did not. Because I was thinking, yeah, let's go at lunchtime, it'll be quiet, which it was more quiet, but every single spot was reserved for the Nyingma gathering. And in a way it's nice, I'm kind of happy for you, you got the full immersion in Bodhgaya when it was truly pumping. Now you know what, from people come together in their thousands and express their faith and they're willing to sit there all day, it's a special thing, You know you're somewhere else. And, yes. So I went, my favorite spot was available, a place where I've sat probably 3,500 of the 4,000 hours I've sat. It appeared to be available, so I squeezed in there. But whenever you're making merit, you have to expect some karma to ripen or some obstructions, some maras to come. There was a nun there who seemed to think that it was someone else's spot. She yelled at me. Fortunately, I think she was speaking Russian, and I don't understand a word, so I wasn't as offended as I might have been if I understood what she was saying. But she was red in the face and I was looking at her, seeing, hearing. And I'm like, I didn't push someone else's stuff out of the way, I just kind of squeezed in there. But she continued to yell at me, and I actually said to her, you know, yelling at a good bhikkhu in this place is not good. And she continued to yell. So I put in my earplugs, pulled the hat down over my eyes, and sat for 3 hours. And she sat next to me, and I spread metta to her. And it was an interesting contemplation that if she'd said something right that I understood, it would probably reverberate in the mind more. That's so unreasonable. How could you say that? No, I didn't understand a thing, so it was easier to put down. So we've been practicing in the sight of enlightenment of the Samma Sambuddhas in this universe. Kakusanda Buddha, Konagamana Buddha, Kassapa Buddha and Gautama Buddha were all enlightened in this place. So there really is just one such place in the universe. And Maitya Bodhisatta will become the Buddha here too. So another wonderful reason to come and pay respects here with a mind of faith is to set that aspiration, if you've not yet liberated yourself, to meet Maitreya and get enlightened under his guidance, or build your virtue further, whatever your aspiration is. We're going tomorrow to the cave where Lord Buddha practiced the extreme of austerities. So I thought I'd read a little bit about his experience there and have some consideration. I'll read some of these verses. So, if you recall, the Bodhisatta has gazed at his wife and child, and by that stage was Yashodhara and his child, Rahula. And my father used to complain, I don't know about that Buddha bloke walking out on his wife and child, he said. It wasn't like that. He was... The Bodhisatta was gazing upon these people he cared for and was aware that they're bound by aging and death, as was he. And as a supreme gift, he wanted to find the deathless and teach it to them. So he left the palace. And it's said that the King Bimbisara saw the Bodhisattva recently gone forth, wandering through one of the streets of Rajagaha, and he was so struck by his bearing, his fine features and regal carriage, he said to one of his messengers, follow him, tell me where he goes, I want to go and speak to him. And he says, that is no ordinary being. He knew that he was from the warrior caste, and he went to him and he said, you're an impressive being, please share. The alarm's going to go off, I have to go to evening chanting. He said, share rulership of my kingdom with me. That's how impressed he was. Kings don't do that very easily. It's just mentioning that so that we understand that the Bodhisatta prince must have had some pretty remarkable presence for another king to say on the first meeting, share my kingdom with me. At which point the Bodhisatta said, very interestingly, that is the realm of death. I'm not seeking things bound up with death, I'm seeking the deathless. The king, being the king, said, oh, cool, well you can have my whole kingdom. Because he was genuinely impressed. And he says, no, great king, I meant it. I see danger in these things. I'm seeking the deathless. And then very importantly, for how Buddhism unfolded, the king said, well, when you discover it, come back and teach me. So we're going to be going to Rajagaha in a few days. And after Lord Buddha taught the Mattad ascetics, and he had 1,000 more arahants, they did need a place to live. And he went to Rajgir, and King Bimbisara offered him his bamboo grove. But now, thinking over there, so when he'd left the palace, he studied with the foremost teachers of his day, teaching the most refined forms of samadhi, the arupa jhanas. So most beings don't just start at the arupa jhanas. One can deduce from this that the Bodhisatta already had pretty amazing samadhi. There was the occasion, which would make sense because he's invested millions of lives into cultivation, but there was the occasion in his childhood when he spontaneously absorbed into a jhana, I believe the first jhana, under a rose apple tree, while watching, I think it was like something like the rice plough festival. They still have that in Thailand today, ceremonial ploughing of the field for the rice. And he was just feeling contented and joyful and at ease, and his mind absorbed into a jhanic state as a youth. And that was that's actually the insight that he had after the practicing austerities, but we'll get to that later. So he mastered the infinite base of space meditation and the infinite base of consciousness meditation, the infinite base of nothingness, and the infinite base of neither perception or non-perception. So we're talking about extremely vast, extremely profound, extremely spacious, the most subtle phenomenon among conditioned phenomenon. And the Bodhisattva was extraordinary because most beings would be deluded by that. Most beings, when they have an amazing samadhi experience, if they've not yet had an insight into not-self, tend to make a self out of it, can become a bit conceited. But it's so blissful and so peaceful. And if a person has that kind of samadhi, usually they can re-enter the absorption quite easily, the various rishis and true meditation masters. But the Bodhisatta had such sharp spiritual faculties that he could see it was a condition that arose, stayed for some time and ceased. It had a birth, an aging and a death. And he said, this isn't it. I'm seeking the deathless. So then he thought maybe an extreme practice of austerities and patient endurance may be the way to the deathless. I thought, suppose I take very little food, say a handful each time, whether it is bean soup or lentil soup or pea soup. I did so. So that means a palmful of soup that somebody's put in his hand. That's his day's nourishment. As I did so, my body reached a state of extreme emaciation. My limbs became like the joined segments of vine stems or bamboo stems because of eating so little. My backside became like a camel's hoof. The projections on my spine stood forth like corded beads. My ribs jutted out as gaunt as the crazy rafters of an old roofless barn. The gleam of my eyes sunk far down in their sockets, looked like the gleam of water sunk far down in a deep well. My scalp shriveled and withered as a green gourd shrivels and withers in the wind and sun. If I touched my belly skin, I encountered my backbone too. And if I touched my backbone, I encountered my belly skin too. For my belly skin cleaved to my backbone. If I made water or evacuated my bowels, I fell over on my face right there. If I tried to ease my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands, the hair, rotted at its roots, fell away from my body as I rubbed, because of eating so little. When human beings saw me now, they said, the monk Gotama is a black man. Other human beings said, the monk Gotama is not a black man, he is a brown man. Other human beings said, the monk Gotama is neither a black man or a brown man, he is a fair-skinned. So much had the clear, bright colour of my skin deteriorated through eating so little. As I strove to subdue myself beside the broad Niranjara, absorbed unflinchingly to gain the true surcease of bondage here, Namuchi, is another name for Mara, came and spoke to me with words all garbed in pity thus: "Oh, you are thin and you are pale, and you are in death's presence too. 1,000 parts are pledged to death, but still life is better. But life still holds one part of you. Live, sir. Life is the better way. You can gain merit if you live. Come, live the holy life and pour libations on the holy fires, and thus a world of merit gain. What can you do by struggling now? The path of struggling too is rough and difficult and hard to bear." Now Mara, as he spoke these lines, drew near until he stood close by. The Blessed One replied to him. So this is interesting, an important thing to notice. He's getting very, very close to his liberation. Mara is going to come and say, "Stop, don't do that. Do this other thing." But the Bodhisatta knew. Mara, as he spoke these lines, drew near until he stood close by, and the Blessed One replied to him as he stood thus: "O evil one, O cousin of the negligent, you have come here for your own ends. Now merit I need not at all. Let Mara talk of merit then to those that stand in need of it. For I have faith and energy, and I have understanding too. So while I thus subdue myself, why do you speak to me of life? There is this wind that blows can dry even the rivers running streams. So while I thus subdue myself, why should it not dry up my blood? And as the blood dries up, then bile and phlegm run dry. The wasting flesh becomes the mind. I shall have more of mindfulness, of understanding. I shall have greater concentration for living. Thus I come to know the limits of which feeling goes. My mind looks not to sense desires. You see a being's purity." So at that point, understanding that the Bodhisatta really did have that understanding, he felt that by practicing in this way he would be increasing his spiritual qualities. As it happened, after 6 years, he had the insight, this isn't really working. But, at least in terms of absolute determination, then this is what I find very interesting about these verses. It shows you how much the Bodhisatta knew about Mara's squadrons. Your first squadron is sense desires. Your second is boredom. Then hunger and thirst compose the third. Craving is the fourth. The fifth is sloth. Cowardice lines up as sixth. Uncertainty is seventh. The eighth is malice and obstinacy. Gain honour and renown besides, and in ill-won notoriety. Self-praise and denigrating others, these are your squadrons. These are the black ones fighting squadrons. None but the brave will conquer them. So suppose you're in a cave meditating or practicing patient endurance. You're going to experience all of these things, some boredom. All of us would experience these things, right? Sense desires, boredom, restlessness. And he knows them as Mara's squadrons. He knows them as negative qualities that darken the mind. But he has not yet worked out how to go beyond them. But he knows them. And I just find this amazing, how familiar he is with this territory. And he just has not yet had the insight into not-self, which makes him not be able to touch his mind, but he's very close. I fly the ribbon that denies retreat. Shame on life here, I say. Better I die in battle now than choose to live on in defeat. There are ascetics and Brahmins that have surrendered here, and they are seen no more. They do not know the paths the pilgrim travels by. So seeing Mara's squadrons now, arrayed all round with elephants, I sally forth to fight, that I may not be driven from my post. Your serried squadrons, which the world with all its gods cannot defeat, I shall now break with understanding, as with a stone a raw clay pot. It's pretty cool, isn't it? You think of the Bodhisattva talking to Mara like that. We better be a bit more humble. We have to sneak up on him. But the Bodhisattva can just say it like it is. He's ready for the fight. So, he said, whenever a monk or Brahmin has felt in the past, or will feel in the future, or feels now, painful, racking, piercing feelings due to striving, it can equal this but not exceed it. So the Buddha had the understanding of he can review samsara, the history of samsara. Basically, no spiritual striver suffered more in their striving. Pretty amazing. The next line. But by this grueling penance I have attained no distinction higher than the human state, worthy of the Noble One's knowledge and vision. Might there be another way to enlightenment? So kudos for all of the incredible heroic effort. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that that image of the emaciated Bodhisatta in meditation is his favorite image of Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, because it reminds him that the Dhamma that Lord Buddha penetrated was not easy to come by, and that we should be grateful for the incredible sacrifice and striving. I thought of a time when my Sakyan father was working and I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, quite secluded from sensual desires, secluded from unwholesome things. I had entered upon and abode in the first meditation, the first jhana, which is accompanied by thinking and exploring with happiness and pleasure, born of a seclusion. So I wouldn't use those words. That's vitaka and vichara, and placing the mind on an object and absorbing with the object. With happiness and pleasure, so that's the piti and the sukha, factor jhanas, born of seclusion, ekagata, one-pointedness. Might that be the way to enlightenment? And following up that memory, there came the recognition that this was the way to enlightenment. Then I thought, so understanding that while he was practicing the austerities, he was not allowing his mind to enter any of the absorptions. That's why it was so heroic. He was just practicing patient endurance. And his body had got to a state where he couldn't have if he wanted to, because it was so emaciated. So he was just patiently enduring with incredible determination. Then I thought, why I'm afraid of such pleasure? It is pleasure that has nothing to do with sensual desires and unwholesome things. So it's a wholesome spectrum, kusala, samatha, samadhi. I thought, it is not possible to attain that pleasure with a body so excessively emaciated. Suppose I ate some solid food, some boiled rice and bread. Now at that time, the 5 bhikkhus who were waiting on me, thinking, if the monk Gautama achieves something, he will tell us. As soon as I ate the solid food, the boiled rice and bread, the 5 bhikkhus were disgusted and left me. Another thing to notice that I like to point out, the Bodhisatta has had a correct insight. He's doing what he needs to do. And his friend said, boo, loser, what do you know? Don't expect those around you to say, yeah, do that, when you're doing the right thing. Doesn't always happen like that. The monk Gautama has become self-indulgent. He has given up the struggle and reverted to luxury. So, there are 2 occasions apparently in the final life of a being destined for Buddhahood where the body emits gold light. And so the first occasion is the eve of the enlightenment, and the second occasion is when relinquishing the attachment of a life force, and then Mahaparinibbana, becomes inevitable. So that happened at the end of his life. So Lord Buddha had received his prediction of Buddhahood from Dipankara Buddha for Asankhya and 100,000 eons before. So all of this was destined, and but then he had to assiduously sow all of those causes and make all of those karmic connections. I think one of the reasons it takes so long is it's not just about developing the qualities and the virtue, because when, as I've read in one of the suttas, the ascetic that requested Dipankara Buddha, Sumedha, he was flying through the air as a yogi who already had arupa jhanas and had psychic powers. And he saw the Buddha moving with his following along a road. And he saw the people clearing the road, making the space for the coming Buddha and his party. And the thought he had was, suppose I were to cause a multitude to cross over like this Buddha has. So he's already at the level where he could be an arahant of the finest quality, with the miracle of teaching and the full psychic powers and the whole thing. And he says, he actually made these very interesting statements: knowing my strength, suppose I were to cause a multitude to cross over. And so that intention of causing a multitude to cross over, that's what takes all the time. It's said that Sariputta and Mahamoggallana built their virtue for 2 Asankhya. So there was millions of lives before it was clear that Sariputta and Mahamoggallana were going to be his chief disciples. There must have been thousands along the way that liked him and made some kind of commitment and then changed their mind. You know what, this is too long. Because in the period of 4 Asankhya and 100,000 eons, the Bodhisattva trains with 20 Buddhas at least. And of course those other people who might be part of his team, they're meeting these Buddhas too, and I'm sure a whole bunch of them say, you know what, Nibbana sounds pretty good. And they flake out, and they cash in their chips, and they pop their clogs, and they absorb into the deathless. But these great beings like Sariputta and Moggallana, they made their commitment, and then they're often in lives together, sometimes as a parrot and different animals, and so it takes a long time to get. You saw that occasion with King Bimbisara, meeting him as he walks past. All of that is karmic causes and conditions. Why is that king there? Why is the king instantly feeling such great faith? He's known this being for many, many lives. And inviting him to come back. That was actually very important, because when the Lord Buddha got enlightened in Isipatana, the deer park, not far from Benares, where we're going in a couple of days, that's the kind of seat of those who have faith in Shiva, and their faith is very deep. And most of those beings would not have been receptive to the teachings of Nibbana, Anatta. And so he basically did a circle around Varanasi, even though he was very close, and came to Gaya, taught the disciples of the Kassapa brothers, and they became the Arahants, and then they went to Rajgaha. And it is said that Indra, Saka, Devaraja, took the form of a Brahmin youth, and I really like Indra. He danced and composed verses as he was entering. You imagine all these strict fire-matted worshipping guys behind you, pure, and there's this kind of cool Deva dancing and singing. Why does Ajahn like this? Let me tell you. The reason I like it is because there are different types of beings with different types of karmic propensities. And what I like about it is, as someone with an artistic temperament, not a temperament, sensibilities, someone with artistic sensibilities, Indra gives me hope. And so does Yasa. We'll read about Yasa in a couple of days, the merchant's son with the gold slippers who wanders into the deer park. Because that's another example of, those Lord Buddha went to teach the ascetics who rejected him for reverting to luxury. And after he taught them and they were enlightened, incredible, heroic, ascetic superheroes, Yasa kind of comes wandering in because he'd seen the courtesans dribbling and he was so distraught. He'd never seen anything awful as a woman drooling. So he put on his gold slippers and wandered off saying, "Oh, it's awful, it's terrible. Oh, it's awful." And Lord Buddha says, "Come here, Yasa, let me show you something that isn't awful, isn't terrible." And then the Buddha doesn't explain to him the Anatalakkhana Sutta, doesn't explain to him the characteristic of dukkha. He explains to him the benefits of generosity, the benefits of virtue. And then with his mind very glad, gives him a very specific teaching, he enters stream entry. And so the point is, different beings do have different character tendencies. And basically they're all workable situations, as long as we commit to the dana and the sila. But Sakadeva Raja is an interesting character in Buddhism because, if my understanding is correct, he's the one that composed the verse. A good word of the Blessed One's reputation has spread as follows. He, the Blessed One, is indeed the Pure One, the perfectly enlightened One. He trains perfectly those who wish to be trained. He is teacher of gods and humans. He is awake and holy. Those are the words of Itipiso that we chant each day. And the next one, Swakato. So those praises to the three jewels were recited, composed by Sakadeva Raja, king of the gods. And it is said that he realized Dhamma when the Buddha answered his question on one of the mountains in Rajagaha. So when we have Sangha as refuge, we have the Bhikkhu Sangha, Bhikkhuni Sangha, you have the Arya Sangha of lay people who've attained a level of enlightenment, but also all the devas that have attained, they're part of Sangha. On the level of mind, they're not wearing a robe, but they are Arya, they are part of the Arya Sangha. And it's just a nice contemplation, particularly in a time when the quality of the monks and nuns, the good ones, are less and less. There's often bad stories in the news of the not-so-good ones. We can bring to mind that the heaven realms also have many, many beings who are stream enterers and sakadagamis, and the goodness never really disappears from the universe. It's just the human world goes for periods where it's closer to the ghost and animal and hell realms, and then it's other periods where it's closer to the heaven realms. But when the goodness in the world, this world, human world, is degenerating, all of the good beings are moved to heaven. So it's good to know that, because sometimes in a depressing era we can get dejected. It all looks like it's going to hell in a handbasket. But lots of devas, lots of goodness, future Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, their teams, all of those people building merits, and Maitreya coming, of course. So I rejoice in your practice, I rejoice in your pilgrimage. We're only a couple of days into it, one day into it really. And I've sat 5 more hours under the Bodhi tree, the first 5 of the 5,000th that I hope to be able to do. And you were there with me, and I rejoice. And I think you should do 5,000 too. So, now that you know, well, one of the benefits of coming and getting a bit familiar with the place is that, okay, yeah, there's some impingement to deal with, there's some difficulty, but it's perfectly doable, isn't it? You just have to put up with some noise and some dust, but you have faith, We know how to get here. We know that there's nice hotels, nice restaurants, so you can do it. I hope that some of you develop the faith and the confidence and come back again for a period of retreat. I myself, after leading this pilgrimage, will come back for a month with Venerable Sampano and Kubajo, Artanjo. We'll do another month of practice here. It'll probably be quieter. The Nyingma Ngan is the busiest, so yeah. I offer this for your reflection.